It says, no, it's not for you. Unfortunately, the lady he was interested in was having an affair with his brother, his sister-in-law's wife. Things got worse. Lots of reasons. His brother could not provide him with the funds. Rupert left, vowing never to return. In actual fact, later on, his brother did ask him to return because his brother had an infant child that was not expected to live. He said to Rupert, please come back, get married, have children, take over the dynasty, and Rupert refused. So, while he was looking for more work with Furlan in Hungary, he was also looking at an approach called mezzotint. Now, he didn't invent it. There's a number of stories he invented. No, he popularized it. And his mezzotint of the great executioner is one of the greatest, considered to be one of the greatest mezzotints ever produced. He was looking at, this is the great executioner, which is apparently based on John the Baptist, the death of John the Baptist by Giuseppe Ribera's painting. So Rupert had done this, plus a number of other well-known mezzotints, the Head of Titan and the Standard Bearer, which you don't have here, but I have a larger picture of the great executioner. And this slide is too small, but apparently Rupert's name is on the blade of the sword. So the technique was invented about 20 years before. He popularized it, brought it to Britain, and it was well known, and he was actually very successful himself. Now, Charles II is now restored to the throne. So he comes back in 1660, which is quite a year, and that playing card on the left-hand side is there for a reason. He was referred to as the Merry Monarch, and he was. Very popular, very social. I'm not going to talk about the number of liaisons he had, but it was remarkable. The entire court was this way. And it was a very merry time. Now, because of all the conflict, because of all the drama, I mean, this has been going on for about 100 years, all the religious persecution back and forth in England. He came back. Technically, he was a Catholic, but at the end of his life, but he kind of professed the Protestant faith, and they kept him in there. And he tried during his reign to try and bring in some tolerance where you didn't have quite such stringent religious laws. But it was a happy time. As a matter of fact, when he came back, he said it was just amazing how many people greeted him. He had landed on the shore all the way to London. There was throngs of people. He says, it's hard to believe there's anybody in this country who didn't want me here. But that 10 years under the Protectorate, there was a dramatic time for Britain. So it was a very happy time, a very jolly time, I suppose, for the nobles, for sure. And as Rupert was one of Charles's closest adult relatives, he was a key advisor. He was appointed to the House of Lords. He was also senior admiral. The only other senior adult relative of Charles would be his brother James, who had a tough end himself. And otherwise, Rupert was one of the closest family members. But now he's described as a bit less explosive, and his judgment's a bit sounder. Perhaps things are stabilized in a number of areas. So the Merry Monarch, overwhelmingly welcomed, popularly known both the liveliness and the hedonism of his court. I mean, there was a lot of licentious behavior taking place. Lived quite pleasantly, tried to have a more tolerant reign, was unsuccessful. Parliament still had control, and so he tried to bring in some as I say, more tolerant rules, often overruled by Parliament. So eventually he dismissed Parliament, but because of the way he had handled himself, that was accepted. It wasn't popular, but it was accepted, and he lived until 1685. So a dramatic change in the situation, and then there was a happier time. During this time, trade was expanding. At the time, the European countries are trying to expand as far as they could, and we see growth of the East India Company, of the Hudson's Bay Company, and Royal Ventures trading into East Africa, all trading enterprises. And as far as we're concerned, the Hudson's Bay Company, Radisson and Crozier, coming from New France, had tried to persuade New France's governors to expand this way through the West. They were unsuccessful to do that. They took their plea over to the British. British listened, Rupert listened, and so they invested £270, they raised funds, and sought a royal charter. And that was the way to do things those days, because the king was in charge of all the territories, and to trade, you had to have a proper charter to trade in different territories that he had responsibility for. In London, it was a tough time. As I mentioned, the plague hit London, 1665. The following year, the Great Fire of London. And during the Great Fire of London, Charles II was quite good at trying to prevent the fire from spreading. Wanted to have soldiers deployed to take care of some of the problems, but Parliament didn't want him to have the soldiers afraid he'd take over, have more power than they did. So that was a good problem, but the fire continued, destroyed a great deal of London. During that time, though, the adventurers coming to North America, they released the Eagle, which was a ship that failed, but the Nonsuch succeeded and returned in 1669 with 1,400 pounds worth of furs. Now the Nonsuch, the replica of the Nonsuch is our Manitoba Museum, and my father built the surrounding decking, all the old harbor. He was the carpenters that built that. He just loved it. And that little ship sailed across the ocean. It's unbelievable how small it is. Unbelievable. So Charles II granted the charter in 1670 for trade into the entire drainage basins, which was a huge area. The Company of Adventurers traded rights into the entire Hudson's Bay drainage area. Government of Company of Adventurers of England trading into Hudson's Bay, and I looked up the meaning of their Latin logo there, pro pelliculum, which means loosely a skin for a shin. There's a couple of different variations of what that really means, but that's what the translation is. Here we have the depiction of the size of the grant, approximately 1/3 the size of Canada, extending into the northern United States. Now the success that he had, this is one of the first successful commercial adventures in North America, in Canada for sure. And keep in mind that New France is a government outpost. That's one of the major differences between Canada and the U.S. In the U.S., the settlers went into the territory, it was unorganized. In Canada, either France or Britain said, we have responsibility for that territory, behave on our laws. There's not that many people out there, but the law extended from the point of view of the Europeans out there before the people arrived, the European people. The Aboriginal people, of course, were there. He was involved in many different scientific, artistic, less military, artistic, scientific, and commercial enterprises. Was one of the first founders of the World Exchange, which was the commercial initiative, and laid the cornerstone in 1670. As a member of the Royal Society, he continued, and this is where he did more of his inventions, continued science and technology. He retired from active seafaring in 74, pardon me. Through more research, came up with many discoveries and inventions. He also had been given responsibility for Windsor Castle. He was basically the noble in charge of that castle for the king. So while he was there, he built a large lab. And what would happen would be some of his friends would show up and find out, they said, well, let's go see what Rupert's up to. Let's go hassle him, because they used to tease him about being a scientist. And so sometimes he would emerge after some explosion in his lab because he was inventing a new type of gunpowder, and try to scare them away because he just didn't want to be bothered by these wasted timers. He wanted to spend more time on science. He referred to as a philosophic warrior. He had the society in its early years, and some of his inventions. He invented a glass teardrop that would explode if you squeezed the end of it. I don't know what the application for this would be, but obviously it was worthwhile at the time. He invented the torpedo. I'm not sure who I was talking to about before, really, about how far back some of these inventions. A torpedo, this is 1600s. The Rupertino. Now, I have not been able to find a picture of the Rupertino, but this is a very highly advanced cannon. It's so advanced it costs 3 times as much as a regular cannon. And Samuel Pepys, who was famous for his Samuel Pepys diary, didn't like Rupert and investigated this because he thought there might have been some fraud. But the gun was so expensive, it was only issued to a few ships and used in war against the Dutch. Now here is the English had gained sanctuary with the Dutch. Now they're at war with the Dutch over trade, back and forth. He came up with a rapid multiple fire gun and one with rotating barrels. This is 200 years before the 6-shooter. Improved gunpowder. Now he was using this improved gunpowder, suggesting it be used in mining, to open up mining territories, mining shafts. Also, a new form of grape shot, a diving engine for retrieving sunken objects from the ocean floor, and a balancing mechanism for better quadrant measurements. What they would do at sea was they have a quadrant and try and shoot the sun and try to estimate where they were. And there was a major, they still use it actually, some purists still try and use that because it's a very interesting way of finding your way around. So, aside from the military, he invented a new brass alloy called Bristol brass, which was still used in the 1800s. It was also a replacement for gold in certain decorative designs. Tempering Herbie fishhooks. I don't know what a Herbie fishhook is, but he came up with some special way of tempering them. New device for lifting water, and a process for painting colors on marble. Apparently, you paint colors on marble and then polish them, and the colors would stay. As I mentioned before, a new trepanning surgery equipment, so that was for surgery on the brain. And breaking cipher codes. I have a cipher code up there, and so this is where I suppose being involved in the military, messages they would do and code. He came up with a way of breaking some of those codes. And this one on the left-hand side here is Prince Rupert's cube. Now, how can a larger cube pass through a smaller cube? He came up with the question, the problem, and actually it turns out to be someone from Holland, a mathematician from Holland, solved the problem. But I just looked this up on the internet. It's still a traditional mathematical problem. I don't know where he found the time. Now, Rupert was found time for a lot of things.
Yeah.
He was involved with Frances Bard, and Frances was the daughter of an explorer and Civil War veteran, so they must have met each other during that time. Frances claimed that they were married. Rupert denied that. They did, however, have a son, and his name was Dudley Bard. Rupert recognized him, sent him to school. Dudley, maybe following his father's footsteps, at an early age went off to war. When he was 20, he was killed at the siege of Budapest. So he was a military man like his father. And this picture is painted by Peter Lilly, who was one of the top portrait painters of the court at the time. After that, here we are, he met Margaret Hughes. Now, Margaret was an actress, and through Rupert's patronage, she became a member of the Hinge Company, theater company, so a very, very popular actress. He provides her with status plus immunity for being arrested for debt. Now, suppose this is one of the advantages of being involved with nobility. You can't be arrested for debt. She needed it because she spent a lot of money. So she was painted 4 times with Peter Lilly, as I say, the most foremost court painter in England, and he was urged to marry her. He never did, but did have a daughter by the name Rupert. And Rupert was a tremendous child. One fault was that she always rules the whole house, and sometimes argues with her mother, which makes us all laugh. Pet lived a very lavish life. She loved gambling, she loved jewels, and Rupert provided her lots of funds to do that, as well as some from the Royal Palatian. He enjoyed the family life. He had a grand building, later known as Brandenburg House. And if you want to investigate something about Brandenburg House, look into it. Very interesting story about the building itself. After a busy life, he died of pleurisy at the age of 62, almost 63. He was buried at Westminster Abbey in a state funeral, which is a very rare honor. He is much better known in Britain for his many exploits, but over here, not that much. We just know a name, Prince Rupert. Who was he? Well, he was someone out there. But he had an amazing life, dramatic life, and not much known about him. So I'm glad to have a chance to listen to it and find out more. And I'm certainly glad you came out tonight to hear a bit more about this amazing man, because he was just amazing, and if you want to stick around for another couple of hours, you want to step two. But thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to try and answer them, and otherwise we'll wrap it up. I'll have to turn things over to Jan.
That was fascinating.
Were there any questions?
Any indication that he ever traveled to Rupertsland? Probably.
No, few people did. Some people, he just sent his money.
Right.
You know, because he was involved also in some of the adventures as well, but no indication he traveled over this far. Closely helped was Caribbean when he was a pirate.
Any others?
Do you know if James Bay was named after one of his relatives? That area?
I'm guessing James Bay might have been named after, I don't know who. Because, well, James would be the James the First of England, perhaps. Not James the Second, that's for sure.
Okay.
Possibly. I don't know. I'll find out.
I wonder if he sold perfume and stuff.
Well,
He's famous for that.
he was a man of many talents. Who knows what he invented?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Fascinating talk, and just curious how you came upon this topic and your interest in it.
Curiosity.
Okay.
You know, you see something and you wonder about it. And just curious because I saw the name a number of times. I just didn't understand the connection. I know lots of connections with royalty back and forth, but the Hudson's Bay Company has always been such a British institution. Why is the German prince involved in this? How's that happen? So
The reason I'm asking is all the work I did earlier in my career with the Hudson's Bay Company, that question never really came to me. And it is a very fundamental question, so I'm amazed at it. Amazed at my own stupidity at the time. I never even thought of it, you know.
oh, it's just one of those things. Just one of the things that pops up, and as I say, I'm just curious about people.
Yeah.
How long did you research on this? How many months or years or whatever?
Well, I suppose when I got into it, probably took me, I'd say a couple of weeks.
That's all?
Spread over months.
Oh.
But the point is, this is such an interesting guy that just his genealogy alone, just his family alone, and then the military aspects, and there are so many wars, and so many things he was involved in. Each of those takes you off down the path, and I had to kind of pull myself back because
Where did you go then to get this information?
internet.
Just all off the internet?
Yeah. I dropped in the library at one point, but the internet's just full of information about him. So if I'm one of those links, and it just takes you to a whole new page. And I have to cross-reference it to see what was the actual truth. And this is a very broad brush, because Rupert, with his personality and with his military dashing, there's usually a couple of different points of view about whether he was a good commander or reckless. So that was complicating factor too.
Did he have any permanent residence, or did he just move with the army and?
Well, by the time Charles II was moving there, the time Charles II was back in England, he was given permanent responsibility for Windsor Castle. So that was his home. He was the major military commander of that castle. He was in charge of the castle. So that's where his...
It's such an interesting career, moving from place to place. Like, did he live in the fields, or was he have residences in these other places he was at? Or?
Well, I suppose when he was being hosted by, well, when he was a prisoner, I was no problem. But when he'd be living in camp, now the camp of a royal commander would be kind of a posh camp, but sometimes he'd be maybe put up with a friendly monarch or a friendly prince, a friendly noble of some kind. So there's no indication whether, I mean, it was all over the place.
Yeah.
So what surprises me is that at the end he talked about giving the some of the royal jewelry collection from the Palatinate to his mistress. And I'm saying, well, how can you keep your stuff together when you have that type of, and especially that kind of stuff, when you have such a perpetual lifestyle, you're always on the move. He was always on the move.
Yeah. And his wardrobe is so elegant. You know,
Yeah.
have it in his side saddle.
Well, they had people to help him with that type of stuff. That's why he needed money from his brother and the emperor.
Interesting.
Well, thanks for coming out on a cold winter night, and let's have some coffee.
Thank you, Dan. That was fascinating. I think most of us learned a lot tonight about Prince Rupert. I, for one, knew hardly anything. So, yeah, and well done, and hey, we'll hope you'll do another one on this sometime. Our next lecture is Karen House, and it is on February the 29th, which is, of course, leap year day. So that's easy to remember. It will be at 7 o'clock in 5006 building. Hopefully the furnace will be fixed by then. If it isn't, I guess it will be here. Lois, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Well, we're starting to work on it.
Okay, so we'll see you then. Thank you. Coffee and tea is on, and help yourself.